I was just talking to Spencer about trying to go down and check out their concrete paving.
Okay.
I know I was supposed to go out there a few weeks ago, but they hadn't really ramped up yet. So I've been waiting for that to go.
That is a wild job site.
Yeah. Well, you went down there.
Yeah. I was down there in January.
Okay.
And yeah, it gives you a whole different perspective of immigration and the challenges on the border. And what you see them talking about in DC is so far removed from reality.
Yeah.
It's insane.
That's been one of the few times in my life where I've been able to see something that's like all over the place on the news. And then you go see it for yourself in person and you're like, whoa, okay, this is a lot different than I thought it would be.
Yeah.
Way different. Yeah, I want to go out there. And then I talked to the Fisher guys the other day and they were just like, oh, you come out to Texas anytime. Like Abbott wants as much press as possible with this.
Yeah. When you look at the conversation that goes around immigration, it's so distorted by different agendas, different incentives. So I was in DC in October and there was a conversation. So we were in this meeting and the U.S. Chamber came and spoke, and I believe it was the USDA came and spoke, and they were talking about immigration and how there are 400 plus industry associations like AGC. There's any type of service industry you can think of advocating for immigration reform because we need workers.
Yeah.
And you think, okay, well, if there's that much demand, why can't something get solved? Why can't something get fixed? And when you look at it, you have to ask, what are the incentives for the people who can actually fix it?
Mm-hmm.
And right now, I think you could argue that they are all better off having it as an issue that they can point to the other side saying, you're not fixing this, you're doing this, you're doing that, than actually fixing it.
Yeah.
So they're better off not resolving it for themselves personally than actually fixing the problem. But the demand is there, the need is there. And when you go down on the border and you see the wall yourself and the situation, the complexity of the problem looks very, very different.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was down there with them, down with Spencer, they were saying, they made a great point that the border wall has been built since, for decades. This isn't a new thing.
Yeah.
It just recently has a spotlight on it.
Yeah. Yeah. And the first time I went down there was Trump had been elected. And so it was in between Trump, the election, and his inauguration. No, Biden had been elected. So Trump was in office, Biden had been elected. So it was in between the election and Biden's inauguration. They knew that come the inauguration, the party's over. And so it was just gangbusters building fence out there. And they were building it in that part of Arizona where it's tough to build in. They haven't built it yet. But Bush built a lot of fence. Obama built the most fence, funny enough.
Yeah.
Clinton built fence back in the day. Yeah. Yeah.
Both started back in the 70s.
Both Bushes. Yeah. And what I realized with that, you can very quickly see, you can very quickly side with the border and customs agents because they are essentially doing something like they're essentially tasked with something completely impossible.
Right.
And given very little resources to actually do their job. And then you can see the other side of it. You can just look at the terrain and even just like try to put yourself in these people's positions. People from all over the world right now, all over the world. Almost all of them are out from Mexico, spending their entire life savings to go on potentially a months-long journey up over to, they have to get to South America, go up Central America, through all the way through Mexico. Trust somebody who, if they die or not, they don't care. Trust a cartel probably to get them across the border somehow. And then once they're in the United States, and then what? And even just like looking at the terrain, like this is like just being having to okay, cool. You have to hike from here to Tucson, and then you end up at Tucson, and then what? And then what do you do? It's crazy.
Yeah. And the thing I've always found interesting to ask is the people who, one, if you understand the border, if you've been there, there's no way to build a wall all the way across it.
No.
It will never happen. And that's not a political thing. That's just a logistical thing.
Mm-hmm.
There's an Indian reservation right on the border. There's 50 miles there where they don't want the wall. We can't do anything there.
Yep.
And, I think when you look at it, I think if you frame immigration as an economic issue, not an immigration issue, it changes the lens under which we could potentially find a solution. Because you look at the workforce needs we have that the whole U.S. economy has.
Mm-hmm.
Right now there's 1.5 job openings for every person looking for a job. So we don't have enough people here.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think we're well past the argument that immigrants are coming to steal Americans' jobs. That's not true. And it's not the case right now. There are jobs that we can't fill. And when you look at the economic benefit of legal immigration, it's massive.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think when what changed for me was when I look at the wall, it's not going to solve immigration. It's not going to keep people out. There's too much incentive for people to come in. There's too much money to be made by the cartels. And it's one of those things where you restrict the flow of people. All you're doing is putting money in the cartels' pockets.
Mm-hmm.
They have the routes. They have the ways to get people through. Anecdotally, I was talking to a guy once. This was back in 2020. And he's from Mexico. He had crossed the border. I said, what happened to the cost to cross in recent years? He said, once Trump came out with his rhetoric, the cost for people to cross the border with the coyote tripled.
Mm.
So it just put money in the cartel's pockets. It didn't solve the problem.
Yeah.
But if we have a secure border, then that gives us a stable platform to really work on immigration reform. Because I don't think anyone is against or can't see the need for legal immigration, for a good process. The process is so broken right now.
Mm-hmm.
We can't hire the people we need. We can't get people in legally to meet the demand that we have.
Yeah.
And so I think if we have a secure border, that gives us a stable platform to work from if the people who can fix it are willing to.
Yeah, I travel out of the country now, and you have to do a lot of paperwork and get, like, some of these countries, you have to get a very legitimate visa. And they know everybody going in and out of that country. Like China, for example, you don't just go to China. It was one of the most complex processes I ever had to follow to just get a legitimate business visa, to then just get into the country. And it's like, this is like this everywhere else. Why is this a problem here? And
it goes back to incentives.
Yes. Yeah.
And I mean, you look at the economic benefit from immigration. Right now, Goldman Sachs' estimate is that over the next 10 years, immigrant labor will add $7 trillion to the economy.
Mm-hmm.
That's not immaterial. And you look at what that does for the economy, you look at what that could do for tax revenue, and then you tie in the national debt discussion. That's a whole nother component to it.
Yeah.
So, we all stand to benefit greatly from this getting resolved. We have a supplier in Canada who a lot of their workforce, they have about 120 employees. A lot of them are Filipino. And it's one family that's kind of grown, and friends and family have come. But they started working there after the Great Recession because the Canadian government was trying to stimulate the economy. They made it very easy for people to come in and immigrate.
Mm-hmm.
And these are all highly skilled welders and fabricators. And, I was there shortly after the Ukraine war started. And within 3 months of that war starting, they had Ukrainian welders there who had left as refugees working in the factory ready to go.
I've met actually quite a few Ukrainians over the past year, all over the world. Yeah.
Yeah, and they've gone all over the world.
Yeah.
If you look at that Canadian process, I mean, from the time the war started to when they were there was 3 months, and they had immigrated legally, paperwork was done, they were in there making a good living.
Yeah. Well, and the only way our country continues to grow is you have to grow the population, but we have that declining birth rate, which is going to be a huge problem at some point.
Yeah, you see it right now in Japan and Italy. And
Japan's a great example, yeah.
Their inability to grow their economy because of their population reduction, an aging population, it's a very material problem for them that they don't know how to solve.
That's why I want to go to Japan, because I want to understand it a little bit better. And I feel like I can't understand it without actually going there and seeing some construction companies out there and just like who's working on these sites, what are the demographics.
Yeah.
I know. You've been there?
I'm going in June.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, I am considering a trip out there this fall.
Okay.
We'll see, because I want to go to China too.
Yeah.
I badly want to go to China again.
And I haven't been to China yet, but
That's a
it's on the list.
wild place to go. When you go to DC, I take it you're with the AED.
Yeah, typically with the AED, sometimes it's with the Utah Mining Association, but it's typically from an industry perspective.
But the AED's Association of Equipment Distributors.
Yeah, Associated Equipment Distributors.
So that's equipment dealers.
Yep.
What is the goal? Like going to DC, what's the objective?
The goal there is to ultimately influence policy. And, like if we want to put a dirty word with it, we're lobbying.
Mm-hmm.
But so does every other industry. And the big thing is helping them understand the issues that are important to us and that affect our industry, because there's so much going on back there that unless you go to them and tell them that here's our issue and here's why it matters, here's why it matters to you, or here's why it matters to your constituents, they're not going to search it out. They don't have time.
Yeah.
And so it's really us going and making sure they're aware of the issues and building the political capital so that when there is something material that we need to push on, we have that capital. So a good example is the infrastructure bill. We pushed on that for a long, long time. And, it wasn't solely because of AED, but AED played a very large role in what ultimately got passed there.
The infrastructure bill and some of the stuff, I think it's really good, but it's something that's been worrying me a little bit more is just the cost to build stuff now is so substantially higher. Like there's this one Amtrak tunnel in Manhattan that is a big deal right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I could be mistaken, and there's some other components of the project, but the main deliverable is a mile-long tunnel to replace an existing Amtrak tunnel. The project is $15 billion. And I genuinely thought it was a typo. I thought it was 1.5 billion because I was like, okay, yeah, 1.5 billion. I mean, that's still a lot of money for a relatively short tunnel in the grand scheme of things when it compared to any other country in the world. But the cost, and so I see like this spending gets celebrated, but then I don't at all see like, hey, but is all the money going to the right place? Or like, why is stuff so expensive to begin with? Like, how did we go build the entire interstate system for the same sum of money? Like, and how did that? And I know there's changes and there's all these big changes that are part of that. So it's not apples to apples, but at the same time, I'm sitting here, I'm like, shouldn't that money go a lot further? Like it stresses me out a little bit because I don't know if it's in everybody's best interest to be spending these sums on what seem to be small projects.
Yeah, I think one of the keys with the infrastructure bill is the allocation by state, by population, by need. And so, yeah, if you look in New York, their population is a lot higher than it is in Utah. Mm-hmm. And so their allocation is going to be different. As to the efficiency of the funds being spent, you have to look, at the transportation departments. Is that the right way to spend those? Maybe it is, maybe it's not.
Yeah.
What does a tunnel in New York get you? Gets you more than a tunnel in Utah will. And so I think it's a cost benefit based on population, but also we have to be asking how efficiently are we allocating those funds?
Mm-hmm.
Are we getting the best bang for our buck? One of the things that I'm really glad about is our infrastructure is aging, to a very, very large degree. And, so as people talk about U.S. competitiveness on a global stage, a lack of investment in infrastructure absolutely hinders us. If our ports aren't up to date, if our airports, if our railways aren't up to date, then that absolutely impacts what we can and can't do on a global stage. So it to me, it doesn't excuse the need to be diligent in how it's being spent, but it is progress that something did get passed on a large scale.
No, it is progress because I feel like a lot of people don't leave the United States. And the United States is 4% of the global population, which puts it into perspective. There's a lot more outside of America in the world than just America. And I go to these other countries. I mean, even like I go to Saudi Arabia, for example, thinking it's going to be Saudi Arabia, thinking in my head, like most Americans probably think of Saudi Arabia, a bunch of sand, a bunch of camels, not a whole lot going on. And you get there and you go into the most beautiful airport you've ever been in before. And you're like, wait a minute. So this is where, and you start traveling more and more and more. It's like, this is where the rest of the world is. And this is better. Like there's a lot of infrastructure out there that I see that's just better than ours, like substantially better. And yet I think we still have the attitude that like we're the best. But I don't quite see that from like an infrastructure standpoint. And I think infrastructure is an indicator. You have to develop the infrastructure ahead of wherever your economy goes.
Right.
And if you stop doing that, there will be a price to pay at some point.
Well, that's what allowed us, the U.S. to take the lead it did in the world, was we did invest in our infrastructure in a large degree and ahead of a lot of other countries doing it. And one of the great ironies I see is, going back to DC, we have people who, will just rail against government spending, including the infrastructure bill, but then complain that we can't compete on a global stage or that China's outpacing us on something. I spoke to one senator who he voted against the infrastructure bill because of the amount of spending, and he gave me a 3-page list of all the reasons why he didn't vote for it. And one of them was he didn't like the continual bailout of the Highway Trust Fund, which I get. The problem is the Highway Trust Fund, which funds a lot of the infrastructure, should fund a lot of the infrastructure, comes from the gas tax. And that gas tax was set back in the 80s, was not pegged to inflation. So the same amount, I think it's like 29 cents.
Yeah.
The same amount that we were getting in the 1980s is the exact same dollar amount that we're getting today. You look at what's happened to inflation, it's changed significantly. And then you also look at what's happened with fuel efficiency. So we're charging, they're getting less revenue per mile. And so his argument was, well, there's $10 million in a $1 trillion bill allocated to figuring out how do we resolve the funding issue for the Highway Trust Fund. I don't like that. I don't want to spend money on that. But let's also not bail out the Highway Trust Fund. But also let's go compete with China. And you look at it and say, okay, there are all these contradictory statements about the same thing here. And so I think there's a lack of understanding. It's like immigration. I think there's a lack of understanding of how the world actually works, where we sit in the world, what our position is in the world. And as you go to these different places, I was in the Nairobi airport last summer. It's nicer than LaGuardia. It's nicer than O'Hare. And that's in Kenya. Dubai was amazing. So yeah, we're not keeping up with a lot of the world.
Yeah, one thing that happened this December was we were in the capital city of Jordan, Amman. And we're in the middle of the city, and we were going to go into this office to say hi to somebody. And we're in kind of a small pickup truck, and we have all of our gear with us. And our backpacks, we have a lot of expensive stuff in it. And in the United States, I don't leave that thing anywhere because I've heard way too many stories from people that I've been around about stuff getting swiped, this and that, like middle of the day, and then the videos online. And it's like, I don't mess with that. So we go and start grabbing our stuff out of the truck to go inside because that's what I would do anywhere else. And the guy we're with, who's Jordanian, he's like chuckling. He's like, "What are you guys doing?" We're like, "Well, we're grabbing our stuff because we're going inside. Someone's going to take it." He's like, "Who's going to take it?" And he's just chuckling. He's like, "That's ridiculous. Who would take that? Like, we don't do that here." And it's like, what? Because if I were to, and the funniest part about it is every time I tell people before leading up to the Middle East that I'm going to the Middle East, they're like, "Oh, you better have your life insurance policy squared away." They're worried for me. And you get out there and no, we don't steal because that's wrong and there's consequences. And you sit there thinking, why don't we have this here? Like, why can't I feel fine in the city I live in, but not have to worry about it in Jordan? It's just crazy. Some of those things are just crazy.
Yeah. The world is a huge place. And we started doing a thing with our kids where we'll do a big trip internationally every year. And a big part of it is just to show them that the world's a big place. There are great, amazing people everywhere in all these different cultures. And you need to understand that you're a part of this global ecosystem, but you're not the only thing.
Yeah.
We're not the only thing here. And, we were in Norway a couple of years ago, and, my kids, my son was 12 at the time. He's saying, why is the U.S. so dirty compared to Norway? And,
Yeah.
I mean, we were walking past the construction site, and it was spotless. It was spotless. And so, I think in the U.S. we have, so many great things going for us. I think where we trip up is we take it for granted a bit, and we don't do the maintenance to make sure that we maintain what we have and what we need.
Yeah. And going back to that lack of understanding, I think there's a lack of understanding based on just basic infrastructure and where things come from. Like we just published a video with Kennecott, which was awesome. Like they gave us the full tour, Rio Tinto Kennecott. And of course you have the people in the comments saying, oh, that's just horrible for the environment, or, oh, that's great, this big gaping hole in the earth. And then it's like, you don't even understand the irony of what you're saying right now, because you're typing this out on a electronic device, on a phone or a computer. That is not possible without mining. That is not possible without what is going on right here. And so it's like, unless you live in the woods, but I know you don't live in the woods because you're commenting on my YouTube video right now. Unless you live in the woods, stop. Like that, you are the consumer of everything going on right here. And this is absolutely necessary. Like if you use electricity, you use this. Or even the people basically saying like, oh yeah, this is all possible, all just for EVs. It's like, okay, yeah, are EVs driving up copper demand? Sure. But copper's still pretty important in like the electricity thing. So
yeah,
that's crazy.
Well, and there's a reason you see companies like Rio Tinto investing so much, because the demand is there, the need is there.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there's very much a lack of understanding of where does your power come from?
Mm-hmm.
And, the way, I try to frame things to people when they ask what we do is, someone calls us for an excavator. What are they looking for? And most people say they want good service. They want a great machine. They want a part. No, they just want a hole in the ground. That's it. Mining, they want a hole in the ground and they want to move rocks from point A to point B. If it's a power customer, they want the lights to turn on. That is it. And our job is to make that as efficient as possible. But yeah, there's a huge lack of understanding of what comes from where and what creates the world that we're in. Rio's done a good job locally in Salt Lake, where Kennecott is, with just some of their PR work. They have ads all over the place saying, this is one of our workers, and here's what they're mining. Mm-hmm. And copper is their main product, but they have 20 plus different products that they take out of that mine.
Yeah.
And they're facilitating solar panels. It's molybdenum. They got all sorts of stuff they pull out of there that help the world in a lot of different ways. But yeah, the lack of understanding is massive. This morning I was watching Bloomberg, and they were interviewing he's a VP at GM over Buick, and yeah, I think the GM side of the product line, and they were talking about the EV Hummer, and he's talking about how it's this great vehicle and sounds like a great truck. Mm-hmm. And he's talking about 0 to 60 in 3 seconds and 0 tailpipe emissions, which that's great. But they started to push in and say, okay, but what's the true impact of making that? I said, well, no, there's no tailpipe emissions. I said, yes, we understand that, but what about the rest of the process? And that was the right question to ask, because you have to recognize that your battery comes from somewhere. I have a Rivian. It's a great car.
You really love it?
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Phenomenal car. They did a wonderful job with it.
Mm-hmm.
But we also realized that, hey, that's powered by coal, because the power at our house comes from a coal plant. And so you have to understand what comes from where and how it's made. And, it's not all roses and sprinkles.
Well, and it's like the carbon debt incurred I was listening to a podcast the other day. I think I sent it to you guys, just about Vulcan Materials
Mm-hmm.
and the business. And the guy that was interviewing had no idea how quarries worked or anything like that. So it was actually fun to listen to because you get from somebody else's perspective. Like as he was going through it, he was learning that like there's rocks under everything. And it's like, yeah, so this is basically like, in a way, yeah, they control these certain markets. They're the only ones that sell the rocks, and you need rocks for anything. And you could like hear him figure it out throughout the conversation. Like, yep, there's, and to me, it's common knowledge, but it's like, yeah, there's that road. It's all rocks with a little bit of oil. That's it. That's it.
Well, I think that's one of my favorite parts of this industry is you get to see how the world actually works, how it's made, where it comes from.
Yeah.
You get to see the guts of it all. And I think a lot of times it gets taken for granted. I take it for granted that the fact that my lights turn on, the fact that my water runs when I turn on the faucet, and there's so much that goes into it. So the fact that we get to see that, I think is amazing. I wish more people understood. I wish more people got to see that.
Yeah.
Because I think there'd be a very different perspective of the industry, of the jobs, of the work that we do.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't have people complaining about, a mine, or, occasionally we'll get the comment, well, why don't they just move the mine? Well, because the copper's there.
Why don't you move your house?
It's not over there.
Yeah.
But I think, having people understand the interoperability of the world, where we have people that'll push back on, some of the quarries around Salt Lake that produce concrete, but then the same breath they'll complain about housing prices.
Mm-hmm.
Say, okay, well, if we move that 50 miles away, what's that going to do to the cost of concrete? What infrastructure do we need to make it feasible to bring that in? There's a whole bunch of costs that'll come in place. And not saying that it's not the right thing to move it. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But we have to understand all the different dynamics that are in play with that.
What are you seeing? Like, what trends are you looking at right now across the industry? I guess across your market, but across the greater industry.
Yeah. So our business, we look at 3 core markets: construction, mining, and energy. And construction, you can more or less lump into housing and heavy civil. Mm-hmm. And both of those are really solid right now. Housing, there's just a general lack of housing across the board. We don't have enough homes.
Well, and Salt Lake.
In Salt Lake in particular,
your major market there is just blown up.
Yeah. It's amazing how much it's grown. But yeah, there's a huge housing shortage. The governor's office announced an initiative this year to build 35,000 homes, 35,000 starter homes, or facilitate 35,000. And I was talking to the guy in charge of that the other day, and the target price range is below $350,000, which, you look at, okay, how is that doable right now?
Yeah.
There's like literally just a handful of houses in the Salt Lake area under that much for a new starter home. I think one was a D.R. Horton townhome.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is going to take some innovation to do that. It's going to take some different ways of thinking of how we use land, how we build, how we allocate resources like water. It does open some exciting opportunities for companies like Icon, the 3D house printing company down in Austin. And, they're targeting getting to, if I remember right, $25 a square foot with their print. So it is going to drive innovation out of necessity.
Well, there's a lot of prefabrication now happening.
Yeah, prefab is absolutely an option.
Yeah.
I think, a lot of it is just market adoption on those.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, the housing it's still a very strong market for us, just purely out of demand. And, mortgage rates, they're not really slowing that. When you look at, historical builds, and you basically you do the math to correct for where we were in the 80s versus today. You look at what happened in the 80s at a 10% average mortgage rate. They were building faster than we are today. Mm-hmm. There's more availability, and they're still selling them at 10%. Mm. And so right now we're at 7, 8, 9%, depending on the house and buyer. And we're building less per capita than we were then. So there's still a very, very robust market, even with mortgage rates where they are. Now they should hopefully come down later this year, mm-hmm. which will hopefully free up some supply because you have people holding on to their house because they have a 2 or 3% mortgage rate they don't want to give up. That could help on the supply side, but I don't see demand for housing really dropping off anytime soon.
No, I was researching some of it the other day, just trying to get my head around it. They said in 2019, average mortgage was about $1,500 a month. Now it's about $3,500 a month. So they said you could have two families living right next to each other in identical houses. One as comfortable as can be. The other barely making their mortgage payments, living paycheck to paycheck on the same salary, same house, same neighborhood, just dependent upon did they buy their house in 2019 or did they buy their house in 2023, which is crazy. And then you have the private equity complication within housing right now.
Yeah.
That has really started to shift the scales. I think it's nearing, if not, it is half of residents within homes are the owner of that home that they're living in, which is crazy.
Yeah, the private equity piece is interesting. I think it does solve some problems in a way, where you have people that may want to live in a certain neighborhood for school or family reasons that maybe they can't afford that, but they can rent and they rent from private equity. So I think it can solve a few problems that way, but it is, definitely impacting the cost of housing, the availability of housing. And where it's concerning is, a home is the single best way for a family or an individual to generate wealth.
Yeah.
And to ideally pass it on to their family or their kids or, generational wealth. And so if you look at the net worth of a family that owns a home, I think the average net worth is about $350,000. Someone who doesn't own a home, it's, $10,000 or less. And so it is an important equity vehicle for a lot of people. Buying a home may not be the right fit for everyone. I think that's, one other circumstance we have to evaluate as a country is owning a home the right thing? Maybe it is, maybe it's not. But just because it was in the past doesn't mean it always will be going forward. There's a need for housing.
Yeah.
So I think we need to be careful not to conflate the need for housing with the need of ownership.
Yeah, ownership isn't even in my cards for years to come, and I'm perfectly fine with that. I don't want to own anything. So that's housing. You can also put commercial within that bucket, and Utah has boomed from a commercial standpoint with all these businesses moving there, which is amazing how fast that's grown.
Yeah, that's been a good market for us. Part of what's worked well is this inland port strategy that we have. We have a confluence of I-15 and I-80 in Salt Lake, which creates some really good dynamics from a trucking standpoint. We have good railways in. And so, just the concept of bringing an inland port to Salt Lake, and then they're doing regional inland ports around the state to try to drive business development in those areas is growing.
Yeah.
And so, we've had a lot of warehouse space come in. We've had Amazon come in a big way. We have a lot of data centers coming in. So, the commercial side has been really solid for us as well.
And then mining, part of mining is to feed the development, the heavy highway, the housing, the commercial. There's the rock side of things.
Yeah, so I'd still lump that in the construction. So the aggregates I put in the construction with the heavy civil.
So then the mining is the copper, the gold.
Gold, coal.
Yeah.
And so that's been really solid. Our largest customers right now are the copper mines, and they're putting a lot of investment into their operations because they see the demand being there for a long, long time to come.
Yeah.
And so, they're making the investments now, both from a expansion phase where they can to equipment replacements, and they're just trying to pump out as much as they can.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's been good.
I'm excited to go back to Kennecott to see their underground operation.
Yeah.
Future state, once we can get back out there. They said that would be the next natural phase of it. And they said it's just massive underground.
Oh, yeah. That mine they'll be operating long after I retire.
Yeah.
The reserves they have there are massive.
It's it's just amazing. It's like, yeah, we can just target the reserve. Like you go underground and you can just chase the good stuff. You don't have to move all the bad stuff on top of it. And you're like, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And you guys have a little bit of gold in your territory.
Yeah, a little bit of gold over in Nevada. I mean, gold's a really good byproduct from Kennecott.
Yes.
But yeah, we do have in the small piece of Nevada that we do have some good gold opportunity as well.
Who are the mining companies within your territory over there?
We have the Pan Mine. KGHM is the primary.
KGHM
with Robinson.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah,
and
Robinson.
And yeah, they're still growing. They're expanding. They're just kind of rocking and rolling there.
And then the energy side, I don't know if I'd call it the most interesting, but it's pretty dynamic.
Yeah, it's one where, we have a part of our business where we'll go build power plants. We'll be the general contractor and provide a turnkey power plant. And that business has really picked up, and we'll do those for primarily municipalities and cities and towns. Yeah. And so we're doing quite a few of those now. And part of that is just to deal with grid stability or instability, I guess.
So they're essentially smaller plants to just fill in gaps as needed.
Yeah, a lot of it's peaking power. So it can be prime power as well, but most of them are peaking power. But yeah, just to help manage through grid stability issues and make sure they have what they need.
And power's fascinating when you really get into the weeds of it, but peaking there's a lot of people using power at this hour.
So they'll kick it on and they can provide power
instantaneously, essentially.
Yeah. They can also run it and sell it. They can send power wherever they want through the grid. Mm-hmm. So there's a very dynamic energy market where you can send power where you want to through the grid.
And the thing with power, the complexity with it, and people argue this point, you can't store it at scale right now.
No. And
the only way to store it at scale is fossil fuel. That is power storage, essentially, natural gas, coal, whatever it is, oil. And so you have to essentially match output with demand at all hours of every day of the year. which
that's the complexity of it. And there's really, yes, there are storage components. There are large batteries out there, but nothing at scale. Yeah. Nothing that can hold a large amount of power for an extended period of time. Uh-huh. And so, you try your best to match your power needs either by producing or buying or selling and offloading. So it's a market that's going to continue to adapt or change a lot. Right now the power needs in the country are much higher than what we're able to produce on a consistent level. And that's only going to grow as more data centers come into place. Mm-hmm. You look at what's happening from an AI standpoint and, just the power consumption of data centers. Right now, data centers are about 4% of U.S. Energy consumption. By 2026, they'll probably be 6%.
Wow.
So that's a massive consumption.
Wow.
And then really the core problem is grid stability.
Uh-huh.
And, you go back to infrastructure spending and investment. We haven't invested in our grid.
Yeah.
And it's pretty fragile. I think if you think back to, the storms in Texas a couple of years ago in the winter and just how it just destroyed the state, that's pretty indicative of the state of the grid throughout most of the country.
Yeah, I read a book about PG&E and the California fires. That was all I needed to read. It was like, I had no idea it was this fragile and this dysfunctional. And they had how many bankruptcies? And I didn't even know it was a private enterprise. I didn't even know it was publicly listed, publicly traded. I was like, isn't that a conflict in a way? It's like, I understand you need outside capital, but at the same time, they're really trying to just perform for the quarter. But is that in everybody's best interest in California? And the answer is no, it's not at all.
Right. It didn't work.
No. And it's crazy. And I know there's some pretty significant power projects happening right now in Utah.
Yeah.
Like transmission projects.
Yeah. We got some big transmission projects, which is key. And because, that your grid accessibility is going to dictate where you can build a data center, where you can build a manufacturing plant. And so you combine that with the CHIPS Act that will help, it's designed to grow chip manufacturing, other tech manufacturing here in the US, reshore some of that. That's great. But we have to say, okay, well, where's the power going to come from? How are we going to get it there?
Yeah.
And, you look at all the different components of the power, I look at it as, we work with all the above. So, we do a lot with underground coal mining, surface coal mining. We do a lot in oil and gas. We have a renewable energy company. So, at the end of the day, people just need the lights to turn on.
Yeah.
But as you look at the allocation of that, of those power sources, we need all of it, but we need more. So where's it going to come from?
We only need more power, future state. And I think Germany's a good case study because they're deindustrializing in some ways. A lot of manufacturers are leaving Germany right now because the power is just too expensive.
Yeah.
Because they tried to change their power grid too fast. And then now their power is 3 times what it was even just a few years ago. And these big manufacturing plants that consume way more power than everybody else is like, we can't afford to operate our business here anymore. And that's where like even data centers, I know some states have just started to say, hey, no more. Like we can't have you here anymore until we figure out the power thing, which is crazy. And that's why there's more and more data centers being built, at least based on my understanding, in the middle of the United States, like up in Idaho, Idaho, for example, Iowa, Nebraska, just put them where people aren't because we can get more power and water that way.
Yeah. The challenge you get when you cross state lines like that is it depends where the power is generated. So you can have a state. So right now in Maryland, I believe it is, people are pushing back because there's a data center supposed to go in from Maryland. And so Maryland offered all these tax incentives. They're going to get the benefit of having it there. Power's coming from Virginia.
Yeah, and Virginia is one of the ones that's had problems.
Yeah, Virginia's saying, well, why are we going to send our power there when we need it here?
Sure.
But, if you're the power provider, saying, well, they'll buy it.
Yeah.
And so, it creates a lot of interesting dynamics of, just generation of distribution. And so I think that's only going to get more complex.
Where do you see technology going right now? Because I know I would consider you on the forefront of that. And I know you spend a lot of your time thinking about that, reading about that. That's why you're here, is because of technology. So yeah, traditional business is selling tractors, as I call it. But where does technology go? Because I think it has a place, but I also think it's overstated in a lot of ways. I think there's a lot of talk about construction technology by people that don't understand construction. They understand technology, they don't understand construction. And I think they're overstating in a lot of ways the impact of it, or incorrectly stating the potential impact. I think it'll have an impact, but I rarely see it discussed in a realistic way.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, if you look at technology from a broad perspective in construction, it has to be paired with industry expertise. We've seen a lot of companies come in and, the founder, the development team is from some other industry where they built a SaaS business or something. And yeah, they may be great engineers, but if they don't understand the specific dynamics of our industry, it's not going to work. A really good example was, it was a VC investment we did a couple of years ago with Busy. And it was mobile timekeeping. And you look at it, and it was clock in and out on your phone. It would geostamp you. You clock in and out of different job segments. It wasn't this overly complex technology, and it wasn't necessarily new, but it was new to our industry. And the reason it worked was because the founder, he also owned an excavation business. So they were able to pilot it, test it, do all the updates with his company to see what worked, what didn't. But what was interesting, when we looked at the churn rate of why did people drop off, it was because lack of adoption by their people. And we say, well, what are they using instead? It wasn't another app. It was paper. You're competing against a piece of paper with technology. And, I think that's where people miss is they say, I have this great technology solution, and it could be, but if they don't understand how the industry works, that our industry is a laggard industry, it's not going to work out. So you have to know how to enter the market, who to partner with, and how to make it sticky and tangible.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think you're talking about technology without talking about workforce. And where I think technology is going to have the biggest impact is becoming a workforce multiplier. And so you say, okay, we need 10 people, but we can only hire 5. Well, how much of that gap can technology fill? And we're seeing things that 10 years ago were I'd call them novel, becoming standard. Mm-hmm. So if you look at telematics to manage your fleet, that's just, if you're not doing that, you're not going to be able to compete.
Yeah. If
you're not using machine control, you're not going to compete because you can't hire enough experienced people to compete with an 18-year-old kid who can learn to dig a basement in 2 weeks at the same level as a 20-year vet. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's going to be the biggest area of opportunity, is filling in the workforce gaps. Because I'm not saying that is the best return. It may not be from a technology investment standpoint, but it's something tangible. It's something that people see and understand and feel.
I think that's always been the role of technology, though. It's like when hydraulics came about, it was really just a force multiplier. Okay, cool. I mean, you see these hydraulic shovels in these pictures, and there's like 12 guys hanging on the side of it because you needed so many people just to keep these steam shovels running. And then hydraulics came about, diesel engines came about, and it's like, wow, we really just need one person to run this now, and then somebody else to maintain it, and that's it. And that's how I see it. I don't know if I get frustrated, but some people talk about construction technology, and we just had this one thing that happened to us, and it was somebody else, and they were basically saying like they were shocked how behind construction is, and they were kind of putting it like, I can't believe they're so behind, and this is going to make it, what we're doing is going to make it way better. And it's like, yeah, I'm not doubting your product one bit, but if you just come in and say, these guys have no idea what they're doing, it's not going to go over very well.
Right.
Because I've done that. That's what I've done. And so I know that that's not a winning strategy.
Right. That's where it has to be paired with that industry expertise and knowledge.
Yeah.
And I think with BuildWit, that's one of the really important roles that Randy plays, mm-hmm. is he has that industry knowledge. He has been the one to go to his company and say, okay, here's the technology that we're going to deploy and why. And he's evaluated those decisions of, do we do this or not? And you have to understand the culture. You have to understand the people you're working with, what their view on it will be, why they may like it, why they may not. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it's not as easy as just, hey, we have a product, use it. I think we lag, let's call it Silicon Valley, by 5 to 10 years. And, that's not necessarily a horrible thing, because what it does is it allows other industries to kind of pave the way, mm-hmm. go figure out what works. And then we can cherry pick what works best and what doesn't.
Yeah.
And so if we're willing to do that, then yeah, you can get an outsized advantage. And the contractors that I see outperform others are the ones who are willing to do that, who are willing to be early adopters in technology, stuff that's proven, and go apply it. And then once it's proven, do it at scale.
To take this in a completely different direction, a question I get all of the time is from younger people, 17, 18, 19, 20. I want to be a equipment technician. I have no idea how to do it. So someone asked you, 18 years old, how the heck do I become an equipment technician? What is your response?
Right now, it's come to our apprentice program. We'll train you. We'll teach you. I don't care if you've touched a wrench in your life. We hire based on attitude and effort. And we found that when we do that versus, okay, what's your skill level today? For our apprentices, for our new apprentices, it works really well. And they learn really quickly, and we have great retention. We see them move into leadership positions pretty quick. We absolutely hire people across the board from a skill standpoint, but that's where I'd say start with that. Attitude and effort, we'll train you on how to do it. Because when we do it, we train you one, with our safety protocols. We train you on our equipment with our tooling. So as you move into your own bay, you're doing it the way that we do it, at Wheeler or at ICM or any of our companies.
Mm-hmm.
It's our way from day one, rather than if you come from somewhere else, we have to retrain you on the way to do it.
How many positions are there every year for that program?
Right now, we're constrained to 12. And that's mainly a function of how many can we put into the shop without overloading
things.
The current technicians. Because once you put them in there, so they come into our apprentice program for 6 months, and we take them through the basics. And so when they go into the shop, they're competent at a good amount of things, but they still need supervision. They still need help.
Mm-hmm.
And so that takes time from their supervisors or other technicians, which then reduces their productivity, which we understand. But we just said, okay, here's as many as we can absorb at a time. Now, yeah, we'd love to expand it where we can. We just haven't had the capacity yet.
Yeah.
But that's where I would start, is who's willing to teach me, who's willing to train me. And if they are, that's a company I want to go to.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we've seen the most success.
I'm thinking through the technicians I've met at Wheeler too. A lot of the ones I'm thinking in my head right now are younger.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say under 40.
The majority of our technicians are.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Just based on my anecdotal evidence. Yeah. A ton of younger people.
Yeah. And, and it's investment, it's a real investment, because we know that right out of the gate, they're not going to be the most productive, but we're looking, what does it look like 3 years down the road, 5, 10 years down the road? And these new technicians today, they're going to be our rock star field techs in 10 years, in 20 years. And so, yeah, we got to approach this with a long view, not just what's going to get us through this year. At the same time, we do have to solve for our current workforce needs, and we do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, you have to have a long view with it.
Yeah, the attitude thing I'm just seeing is more and more valuable. I'm thinking like this one comment I saw the other day. It was just out of left field. It was, I don't even know. I don't even remember what the post was, but it was like, work for the company so that the boss can just continue to line his pockets or something like that. And I was sitting there thinking about it. I wasn't even upset about the comment. I rarely get upset about comments nowadays. I've tried to temper that. But I was almost upset for that individual, because it's like, that's such flawed logic that only hurts you as an individual before it hurts anybody else. Mm-hmm. If it even hurts anybody. Like, you're the only person that loses thinking like that. And there's a reason they think like that. They've probably been screwed over a bunch of times. Mm-hmm. But then it also, at the same time, becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you think everybody's out to screw you, then you don't act trusting.
Right.
And then everybody ends up screwing you. But if you're able to build that right mentality, there's nothing you can't do in this world. There's nothing you can't do.
Yeah, it's proven to work really, really well for us. I'd say the other side of the coin, though, is that our leaders need to have the right attitude as well. Because if we go into it with, the mentality that I do hear a lot still of, millennials are lazy, Gen Z is lazy, and you don't work as hard as I did. I had a conversation with a guy last week who, I would think, after all the time we've spent talking about, got to meet people where they are and how they work. And yeah, it may not be the same way that you did it, but it's okay. I would think that message would be getting more traction.
Yeah.
And I still find people who have the approach of, well, I work 7 days a week and 12 hours a day, and if you don't, then you're lazy. I don't want you on our team. And if our leadership team, if our managers, supervisors don't have an attitude that allows the people with the right attitude to come in and succeed, it's not going to work. So it's got to be on both sides of the table.
Yeah. But that's where they say they want help. They say they're tired of working so much or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. But then they also say, well, but all the help I get's lazy. And it's like, well, you're better off. Like, as a leader, as a manager, you're best off developing those around you. That's one, that's your job. But two, you win if you do that.
Yeah.
Because then you don't have as much stress. You don't have as much worry. You can produce more, and then you'll probably make more money because you'll be more valuable to your company.
Right. Your best return on investment is developing your people.
Yeah.
The companies that succeed the most. There was a really interesting study a couple of years ago where it was by a couple financial analysts who they'd spent decades studying, the Caterpillars, Honeywells, GEs, Boeings, Danahers, these large industrial companies with, hundreds of thousands of employees. And they said what they saw is, on average, the breakdown of employees would be you have 5% who are your rock stars. They're going to go just, that's your Michael Jordan.
Mm-hmm.
80% are what they call average or perform as expected. They show up on time, they do their job, they're just reliable. Then you have 15% that are your destructive employees. They tear other people down. And they said that the single most impactful thing you can do is, when you look at where people put their time and attention, it's on the 5%.
Yeah.
Because that's easy. That's easy to go talk to someone who's performing well. How do we help them perform better? That's a very easy conversation to have. It's a lot harder to have a conversation with a destructive employee who isn't performing well. But the single largest impact you can have is by improving that 80%, the average employee. Because if you improve them just by 10%, that is more than increasing that 5%'s output by 50%.
Sure.
So if you put your time and attention on improving your average employee, give them the skills or resources that you need or that they need to perform, you're going to outperform by a very large margin anything that you've done in the past. The problem is that when you look at performance management, 90% of the issues of why people don't perform are typically with the manager, some internal factors, external factors. Maybe 10% of them are specific to that employee, like their own motivation. We can train on skill. We can give them the right tools. We can put them in the right environment to succeed. We just have to make sure that we're doing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I bet your highest paid people are those that are developing the most people.
Yeah.
I bet there's a direct correlation there.
Yeah. And that's where you develop your best competitive advantage, is by developing your people. And, we've always heard that, people worry about, well, if I train this person, are they just going to leave? Well, if you train them and they leave, that's probably on you, because you didn't create an environment where they could succeed or want to stay.
Yeah.
But think of how destructive it is if you don't train them.
Yeah.
How much worse off are you?
Well, and it's such a defeated mentality too. You're basically you're arguing that, well, they're just it's out of my hands whether they stay or not. And it's like, well, yeah, you don't have an employment contract with them, so it is in a way out of your hands, but it's also not out of your hands, because if you work hard to make it a place they want to be and pay them well and give them what they want and allow them to grow and give them good leadership and appreciate them, they're probably not going to stay. They're probably not going to leave.
Right. Because if you go back to the 5-80-15, those 5%, they have every option in the world to go wherever they want. Now, if you're an NBA GM and you hear, hey, Michael Jordan's a free agent, he wants to talk, what do you do? Say, we'll talk. Absolutely. The 80%, they have great job options. They can go where they want. The 15%, they don't want to go anywhere else. They're not going to quit because they know they can't get another job somewhere else, or it's going to be really hard.
Yeah.
And so, if you don't work to keep your people, to do what you need to make them successful and enjoy their job, that's on you.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't mean that you have to pay them insane wages. It doesn't mean that you have to, go full Silicon Valley with every weird benefit you can think of. But pay them well, treat them right, listen to what they say, and make the right decisions. It's not, I don't think it's overly complicated. And, we're not perfect at this. There's a lot of work that we have to do.
Yeah.
But, I think we make it a lot harder than it needs to be.
Yeah, but for how many people you have, I feel like you do a pretty good job. Because I'm every time I talk to a Wheeler technician, I'm always curious, just like, how is it? And just shooting the poop with them. And it's pretty damn positive, I'll say.
Yeah. And I say, it's because we've put in the effort to do it. We do quarterly surveys, and, it's basically just 3 questions of, do you like working here? Or do you see yourself working here in the future? And what can we do better? And we make it a point to read every single comment. So right now we get about 40% participation, which, it's absolutely enough to go off of.
It's hundreds of responses to read. Yeah.
And so we look at it and say, okay, what can we take from this? What's actionable? There are things where, we need to take action. There are things where maybe we just need to provide some clarification as to what we're doing or why. Sometimes we need to say, no, we're not going to do that, but here's why.
Mm-hmm.
And really, people just want a voice. And there's a lot you can learn from people who, the boots on the ground.
What is one of the lessons you've learned recently from those feedbacks or from the surveys?
One of the biggest changes we made was to our parental leave policy for children.
Mm.
And it opened our eyes to the fact that our maternity leave or maternal leave policy was not adequate. It wasn't set up real well. We weren't necessarily losing people because of it, but when you looked at it, it wasn't real great.
Mm-hmm.
And then we added 2 weeks of paternity leave in there. And we set it up in a way where, you get 2 weeks, you can use it how you want. If it's 2 weeks after the baby comes, if you want to use it for appointments before. And then we expanded it to adopted children too, because that's a whole process.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something that an employee brought up. They had adopted a kid and said, would this work here? And, it's not a benefit that gets used all the time. But it's something that showed people that you spoke, we listened. We see that's an issue. We did benchmark it across the industry because, we have quite a few tech companies in the state, and people were saying, well, Adobe does this, or this other company does that. We went and verified and said it's a little more nuanced. In fact, ours is better in some ways because for some of these tech companies, you had to be there for a year to get their full maternal leave policy. As soon as your benefits kick in, you get it with us. And so we were able to, dispel some rumors, add some clarity. We learned a lot from it, but put ourselves in a position where, we can use that as a way to retain talent and attract talent.
That's great. Well, I have a meeting to get to in 6 minutes, and you have plenty of stuff going on here in town. Glad you're able to stop by, though. For the apprenticeship, do they just find it through the company website?
Yep. Wheelercat.com. Or campbellcompanies.com. It'll be on both sites.
Yeah, and there's a ton of companies. So Campbell Companies is everything.
Yeah, Campbell's our umbrella.
Yeah.
And we have 10 companies under that. Wheeler's our largest SCAD dealership. We have a crushing dealership, a couple technology companies, renewable. So everything's under that Campbell Companies umbrella. They all interplay with each other, but it's all across either construction, mining, or energy.
Awesome. Well, thanks.
You bet.